Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on a condition that's far more complex and honestly more widespread than most people probably imagine. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD.
Right.
If your mind immediately conjures, an image of restless child always on the go, well, you're not alone. But that's really just a tiny glimpse into what ADHD truly is.
That's precisely it, yeah. The common perception often misses the nuance, doesn't it? Viewing ADHD mostly as a childhood phase, marked primarily by that overt hyperactivity. So our mission today is really to cut through those misconceptions. We're armed with the latest research, expert insights, trying to give you a true shortcut to understanding the multifaceted, lifelong nature of ADHD.
Okay, so we're going to unpack everything from what it really means to be diagnosed to the daily management strategies for both kids and adults.
Exactly.
And trust me, you're going to uncover some truly surprising facts, like the sheer number of adults maybe living with undiagnosed ADHD.
Huge numbers.
Yeah. And the really profound connections this condition has to overall health and even potentially life expectancy. Okay, let's dig in.
Okay. So to start, maybe let's ground ourselves in just a clear understanding of what ADHD actually is. At its core, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder.
Neurodevelopmental, okay.
Right. So it means it originates in the brain's development, and it leads to these persistent patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity that significantly interfere with daily functioning in, various aspects of a person's life.
So it's really not just a matter of willpower then, or discipline. It's fundamentally tied to how the brain develops.
Precisely. It's biological.
And when we talk about ADHD, are we describing one single thing, or is there more nuance to how it shows up?
That's a great question. There are actually three primary ways ADHD can manifest. First, you have the predominantly inattentive type.
Right.
Here, the main challenges are really around attention and focus. Then there's the predominantly hyperactive impulsive type.
Right, the classic image.
Yeah, characterized by those high energy and impulsive behaviors we often associate with ADHD. And finally, the most common form is actually the combined type.
Combined, so a mix.
A mix, yeah, a mix of symptoms from both categories. And for a formal diagnosis, these patterns of behavior must typically begin before age 12.
Before 12, okay.
And be consistently present in two or more settings, so maybe at home and at school, for example. And they have to significantly impact development and daily life.
It feels like there are just so many pervasive myths floating around about ADHD.
Yeah.
It's almost like society has this one-dimensional picture.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's maybe tackle some of those head on. Like the idea that all kids with ADHD are hyperactive. That's a massive one, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's honestly one of the most damaging misconceptions. The reality, many children struggling with attention problems are not overtly hyperactive at all.
Really?
Yeah. They might appear quiet, maybe spacey, or even seem unmotivated sometimes. These are often the quiet dreamers, you could say.
Quiet dreamers. I like that.
They're less disruptive in a classroom, perhaps, but they still face significant hurdles. Following directions, keeping up with schoolwork, navigating social interactions. It's a crucial distinction because they're so easily overlooked.
That's such a vital point. So a quiet child who seems to be perpetually daydreaming could actually be experiencing some really profound challenges.
Exactly.
What about the notion that kids with ADHD can never pay attention? Is that fair?
That's another very common one, and it's also just inaccurate. The truth is, individuals with ADHD often demonstrate really intense focus. Sometimes people call it hyperfocus.
Right, I've heard that term.
On activities they genuinely enjoy or find stimulating. The real struggle isn't usually a complete lack of attention, but rather an inability to regulate attention effectively.
Regulated. Okay.
Yeah. The difficulty really arises with tasks that are boring or repetitive or just unengaging. That's where sustaining focus becomes incredibly challenging, no matter how much they try.
And then there's the one that must be deeply frustrating for people. The myth that individuals with ADHD could just behave better if they wanted to.
Oh.
I've heard that far too often.
Oh, that's a particularly harmful one.
Yeah.
Because it places blame where it really doesn't belong. The fact is, these children, and adults too, for that matter, are truly doing their best. They genuinely struggle to sit still or stay quiet or maintain attention. It's not out of defiance or, a lack of willingness. It's because of a neurobiological difference.
Right.
It's like telling someone with, a broken leg to just walk. Normally, it doesn't work like that.
That's a great analogy. And finally, this pervasive idea that kids will eventually just grow out of ADHD. Is there truth to that?
Unfortunately, no, not really. While symptoms can evolve, and sometimes they might lessen in severity a bit with age, ADHD very often continues right into adulthood.
So it's lifelong for many.
For many, yes. But effective treatment, that's the key. It can significantly help manage those symptoms throughout life and really improve overall functioning. The idea that it's just a phase that can lead to really missed opportunities for support.
Yeah, I can see that. And that leads us right into talking about ADHD in adulthood.
Yeah.
It really feels like we're hearing more and more about adults getting diagnosed later in life. What's the real story there? Is it becoming more common, or are we just better at recognizing it?
It's a significant and definitely growing recognition. I think both are true to some extent. Recent surveys indicate that as many as 1 in 4 adults actually suspect they have undiagnosed ADHD.
1 in 4, wow.
Yeah, and get this. More than half of adults who do have ADHD actually receive their diagnosis in adulthood, often after years, sometimes decades, of struggling without understanding why.
That's incredible. So if you're diagnosed at, say, 40, your symptoms probably won't look the same as they did for a 7-year-old.
Precisely. Hyperactivity, that classic symptom, is most prominent usually in children. As individuals hit adolescence, it might morph into more subtle restlessness or fidgeting. By adulthood, people may primarily experience things like inattention, maybe an internal sense of restlessness, difficulty with organization, that's a big one, and often significant challenges with emotional regulation.
Emotional regulation. Tell me more about that in adults.
Yeah, it's a huge part. Difficulty managing frustration, maybe being quick to anger or experiencing mood swings. They might also find it really difficult to maintain healthy habits, manage finances consistently, or navigate relationships smoothly.
And what about gender differences? I've heard, and you touched on the quiet dreamer idea, that girls often go undiagnosed. Is that still the case?
You're touching on a really crucial point there. Yes, girls are indeed significantly less likely to be diagnosed and treated for ADHD. Their symptoms often present differently than that stereotypical hyperactive boy image.
So,
Well, instead of being overtly disruptive, they might quietly struggle more with internalizing symptoms. Things like anxiety, forgetfulness, disorganization, and just a profound lack of focus, even if they seem okay on the surface.
so they might be masking it.
Often, yes. They frequently compensate by putting in immense extra effort trying to hide their difficulties. This can lead to much later diagnoses and, unfortunately, a lifetime of accumulated negative consequences. Low self-confidence, burnout, anxiety, or even depression.
Wow. Okay, this really brings us to a super important realization. ADHD rarely exists in isolation, does it?
Almost never.
It's almost never just about attention and hyperactivity. It often comes hand in hand with other conditions, creating a truly intricate, complex picture.
That's a critical aspect of understanding ADHD comprehensively.
Absolutely.
A 2007 survey, for instance, it's a bit dated now but still indicative, revealed that over 2/3 of children with ADHD had at least one other co-occurring condition.
2/3.
Yeah, and nearly 1 in 5 grappled with 3 or more coexisting challenges.
Wow, that's a lot for anyone, let alone a child, to navigate. What are some of the most common co-occurring conditions we see in kids?
In children, learning disabilities are highly prevalent. They affect nearly half of kids with ADHD. Compare that to just a small fraction, maybe 5% of those without ADHD.
Huge difference.
Massive. Oppositional defiance disorder, or ODD, that's common in over 40% of cases. We also see anxiety in nearly 1 in 5 children with ADHD,
Okay.
compared to maybe 2% without, and depression in about 15% versus maybe 1% without. And there's a particularly high risk for writing disabilities, like dysgraphia.
Writing specifically.
Yes, impacting over 60% of boys and nearly 60% of girls with ADHD. It's a big challenge.
And these co-occurring conditions, they don't just vanish when childhood ends, do they?
No, absolutely not. They often continue and sometimes even intensify into adulthood. For adults with ADHD, mood disorders like depression or bipolar disorder are present in over a third.
A third, compared to
About a tenth, maybe 11% of adults without ADHD. Anxiety disorders affect nearly half, almost 50% of adults with ADHD versus less than a fifth, around 19% without.
That's staggering.
It is. And substance abuse disorders are present in about 15% compared to around 5 or 6% of the general population. There is also a really striking link between ADHD and obesity.
Obesity too. How strong is that link?
Pretty strong. Its prevalence increases by about 70% in adults with ADHD and 40% in children with ADHD compared to their neurotypical peers. It might relate to impulsivity, difficulty planning meals, or using food for dopamine regulation.
So the real insight here isn't just that ADHD has companions, as it were.
Right.
It's that comorbidity is the norm, not the exception.
Yeah.
That has to fundamentally change how we approach diagnosis and support.
Right.
It's rarely just about one single condition.
Absolutely. You have to look at the whole person, the whole picture.
And beyond these sort of co-occurring mental health or developmental conditions, there are some truly surprising and frankly concerning health implications linked to ADHD that you might never expect.
Indeed. One recent and, quite concerning finding is that adults diagnosed with ADHD may actually have reduced life expectancies.
Reduced life expectancy. Wow. Why?
The reasons are likely complex, maybe higher rates of accidents, suicide, comorbid health conditions like obesity or cardiovascular issues, perhaps difficulties managing chronic illnesses. It's an area needing more research, but the signal is there.
That's sobering.
It is. We also see a very strong link between ADHD and increased car crashes, particularly noted in older adult drivers.
Okay. Again, related to maybe inattention or impulsivity behind the wheel.
Likely, yes. Slower reaction times, distractibility, it poses real risks.
And what about genetics? You mentioned it's neurodevelopmental. Is there a genetic thread tying ADHD to other significant health markers down the line?
Fascinatingly, yes. Research has found that, for instance, early vocabulary size is genetically linked not just to ADHD, but also to later literacy skills and broader cognition. And perhaps more strikingly, a recent discovery suggests that genetic vulnerability to ADHD might signal an increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease later in life.
Alzheimer's. Wow, that's a heavy connection.
It is, and again, more research is needed to understand why, but the genetic link seems robust. We also see a connection, though perhaps less dramatic, to heart disease in children. One study found about 2% of kids on ADHD medication had a pre-existing heart disorder compared to around 1% not on medication.
Which highlights?
It really highlights the need for careful screening and cardiac history before starting certain medications, even though large studies haven't shown increased risk from the meds themselves in healthy individuals.
Okay, so understanding the full picture of ADHD really goes way beyond just focus and fidgeting. It truly impacts overall health, well-being, safety, even longevity in profound ways.
Absolutely.
This brings us squarely to treatment. When we talk about managing ADHD, medication is often the first thing that comes to mind for many people. What's the actual role of medication here?
Medication is a powerful tool, definitely. And for many individuals, it can be truly transformative in managing symptoms. It's important to stress, though, it's not a cure.
Right. Not a cure, but a tool for management.
Exactly. It can significantly reduce symptoms like inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity, and really improve daily functioning. The most common and generally most effective medications are stimulants.
Stimulants?
Yeah.
Like the ones people often hear about.
Yeah, like methylphenidate-based drugs, Ritalin is a common brand name, or dextroamphetamine-based drugs like Adderall or Vyvanse. They work by boosting the levels of crucial brain chemicals, neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine, which are vital for attention, focus, motivation, and impulse control, basically helping those circuits in the brain work more effectively.
Okay. But I imagine, like pretty much any medication, there could be side effects. How significant are those typically?
That's right. Like all medications, stimulants can certainly have side effects. Common ones can include things like sleep problems, difficulty falling asleep mostly. Decreased appetite is another big one. And in children, particularly boys, during the first year or so of treatment, sometimes a temporary slowing of growth. Those studies show they typically catch up later.
Catch up later. Okay. Any others?
Other potential side effects can include headaches, maybe some nausea, occasionally the development or worsening of tics.
Tics.
Right.
Like muscle twitches.
Yeah, involuntary muscle movements or vocal sounds, and sometimes what's called rebound, where irritability or other symptoms briefly worsen as the medication wears off at the end of the day.
That sounds like potentially a lot for patients and their families to navigate.
It can be, definitely. But the good news is that many of these side effects can often be managed very effectively. It's not usually an all-or-nothing thing.
How so?
Well, management might involve adjusting the dosage, finding that sweet spot. Or trying a different release formula of the same medication, like switching from an immediate release to an extended release version. Or even switching to an entirely different type of stimulant, or sometimes a non-stimulant medication if stimulants aren't well tolerated. There are options.
That's reassuring. What about those past concerns about cardiac risk? I remember hearing things about that.
Yeah, that was a significant concern for a while. But extensive reanalysis of large data sets has actually shown no increased risk of serious cardiac events, like sudden death, for kids or adults on stimulant medication compared to the general population without ADHD.
So the risk isn't higher from the meds themselves.
The evidence suggests not for otherwise healthy individuals. However, careful guidelines still recommend getting a thorough cardiac history and a baseline blood pressure check before starting medication, just to be safe and screen for any underlying issues.
Right, makes sense.
And it's also worth acknowledging the recent challenges many people have faced with ADHD medication supply shortages. That adds a whole other layer of stress and complexity for patients trying to manage their condition.
Oh, definitely. That's been a huge issue. Okay, so beyond medication, psychotherapy is often recommended, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. What does the research tell us about how effective that is, specifically for adults with ADHD?
Right. CBT is indeed a widely recommended structured psychological intervention. But a recent study looking into adult experiences with CBT in the UK revealed something really fascinating and honestly pretty crucial, a big distinction.
Okay. What was the distinction?
Well, the participants generally found that non-adapted, sort of generic CBT was often unhelpful, sometimes even overwhelming, and for some actually felt harmful to their mental well-being.
Harmful. That's quite a strong word for therapy. Why? What exactly made it so ineffective or even detrimental for them?
Several key factors came out. The core issue seemed to be that the standard CBT framework simply wasn't adapted for the specific challenges of ADHD.
How so?
It meant it didn't adequately account for things like executive function impairments, those core difficulties with the brain's management system, like working memory, planning, task initiation, staying focused.
Right, the stuff that makes ADHD ADHD.
Exactly. And also difficulties with emotional dysregulation, which we talked about being central to the adult ADHD experience. Generic CBT wasn't really built to target those specific mechanisms in the way an ADHD brain experiences them.
So the standard approach just didn't fit. It sounds like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
Precisely. That's a great way to put it. The goals set in therapy were often too generic, maybe focused on anxiety or depression in a general sense, but didn't directly address common, practical ADHD management issues like time management, procrastination, organization, or specific emotion regulation strategies tailored to ADHD. Participants also reported finding themselves either deluged with overwhelming amounts of generic worksheets or resources, often relying heavily on memory to implement them, which of course is a core challenge area for many with ADHD. Or conversely, they received almost no learning aids or structure at all, making it hard to apply anything.
That sounds incredibly frustrating. And what about the therapists themselves? Were they generally knowledgeable about ADHD?
Well, many participants reported that their therapists seemed to lack sufficient knowledge about ADHD specifically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. This often led to participants feeling judged, misunderstood, or feeling like they constantly had to educate their own therapist about their unique struggles and why standard advice wasn't landing.
That completely undermines the therapeutic relationship, surely.
Absolutely. Furthermore, the typical duration for CBT, usually somewhere between 5 and maybe 20 sessions, was often perceived as far too short for individuals with ADHD.
Too short. Why?
They felt they needed more time to really process the information, to experiment with strategies, and to embed new habits into their daily lives, given the executive function challenges. It takes longer to make things stick.
That's a powerful insight. It really sounds like a fundamental mismatch between the therapy's standard delivery and the patient's actual neurobiological needs and learning style.
It truly was, based on these experiences. And the study also highlighted another interesting point. CBT's traditional focus is often on symptom reduction,
Right.
which sometimes inadvertently ignored or even pathologized the unique strengths often associated with ADHD, things like creativity, high energy, the ability to hyper-focus on interests, spontaneity. Participants sometimes felt their identity, the unique parts of them linked to ADHD, was being kind of dampened down rather than understood, accepted, or even leveraged as a strength.
But you mentioned a distinction. There was a striking exception in that study, wasn't there? The one participant who did have a truly positive experience.
Yes. And this is where the really profound insight lies, I think. The one participant in that particular study who received adapted CBT specifically modified for ADHD from a therapist who actually also had ADHD, described the experience as transformational.
Transformational. Okay, what made that different?
This adapted approach actively explained their behavioral irregularities within the context of ADHD. It helped them understand the why. It also explicitly highlighted ADHD strengths alongside the challenges, fostering deep self-acceptance.
So validation and understanding were key.
Huge. And it empowered them to adopt genuinely effective cognitive and behavioral strategies in daily life. Things like practical ways to moderate their time, chunking activities to avoid feeling overwhelmed or bored, strategies designed with ADHD in mind.
This study really delivers a powerful, almost shocking insight, doesn't it? That for ADHD, one-size-fits-all therapy isn't just less effective, it can potentially be worse than useless, even harmful.
It certainly raises that question very starkly.
The key takeaway seems to be, when it comes to mental health interventions for neurodevelopmental differences like ADHD, specialized adaptation isn't just a nice-to-have, it seems non-negotiable for truly effective, helpful care.
I think that's a fair conclusion from this research, yes.
That really raises an important question for you, our listener, to maybe consider about the kind of support available.
Indeed. It forces us as professionals and as a society to ask, are we providing the right kind of support? And just to briefly touch on another rapidly evolving area, telehealth is playing an increasing role in ADHD care.
Right, seeing doctors or therapists online.
Exactly. It definitely has the potential to help reduce access barriers, things like transportation issues or maybe living far from a specialist.
Sure.
Though it's worth noting research is still ongoing, particularly looking into potential risks like addiction risk, especially maybe for young adults starting stimulant treatment entirely via telehealth without in-person assessment. It's an area to watch.
Okay. So thinking beyond the prescribed medications and these formal therapies like adapted CBT, what other practical approaches and maybe holistic strategies can really make a difference for someone managing ADHD day to day? It sounds like a much broader toolkit is often necessary.
Absolutely. You're right. The most effective ADHD treatment, really for both children and adults, almost always involves a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach. It really needs to extend far beyond just pills and therapy protocols.
Yeah.
It really delves into significant lifestyle interventions as well.
Give us some examples. What's in that broader toolkit you mentioned?
Well, exercise, for one, is incredibly powerful. It's often called a kind of natural medicine for ADHD.
How does it help?
Physical activity boosts those key brain chemicals we talked about, dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin. This directly helps improve concentration, motivation, memory, and mood. And unlike medication, it requires no prescription and has, universally positive side effects.
Hard to argue with that. And sleep. Now, that's huge for general well-being, but I'd imagine it's especially critical for ADHD.
Oh, and absolutely crucial. Poor sleep can significantly worsen ADHD symptoms like inattention and irritability, often creating a really vicious cycle.
So what helps?
Key tips usually include maintaining a really consistent bedtime and wake-up schedule, even on weekends if possible. Ensuring the bedroom is completely dark, quiet, cool, and definitely free of electronics. And avoiding caffeine and screens for at least an hour or two before bed, good sleep hygiene is vital.
Makes sense. What about nutrition? Can what we eat really impact ADHD symptoms?
It certainly seems to play a role, yes. Mindful eating habits are important. This includes having regular healthy meals and snacks, ideally maybe every 3 hours or so.
Why every 3 hours?
To help keep blood sugar levels stable and provide consistent energy to the brain, which can help with focus and mood regulation. Emphasizing nutrients like zinc, iron, and magnesium might be beneficial, as deficiencies sometimes correlate with ADHD symptoms.
Okay, and types of food.
Including lean protein and complex carbohydrates, like whole grains, fruits, vegetables, can provide more sustained energy and alertness compared to simple sugars. It's generally advised to avoid or minimize highly processed junk food and to reduce excessive sugar and caffeine intake, as those can sometimes exacerbate hyperactivity or lead to energy crashes.
Any specific supplements people talk about?
There's growing evidence, suggesting that omega-3 fatty acids, the kind found in fatty fish like salmon or in fish oil supplements, might help improve mental focus for some individuals with ADHD.
Interesting. Okay. And for those feelings of overwhelm or restlessness or anxiety that often accompany ADHD, are there calming techniques that can help manage those specific symptoms?
Definitely. Relaxation techniques can be really beneficial, things like meditation, yoga, or Tai Chi. These practices can help increase attention and focus over time while also helping to decrease impulsivity, anxiety, and even symptoms of depression.
Meditation specifically.
Mindfulness meditation in particular has shown promise. Research suggests it can actually help strengthen the prefrontal cortex over time.
The brain's CEO.
Exactly. The part of the brain responsible for those executive functions like attention regulation and impulse control. So building that muscle, so to speak.
Okay, so those are great individual strategies, but beyond that, what kind of support systems are most beneficial, especially thinking about children in their daily lives, like at home and at school?
Yeah, support systems are absolutely key. For children, foundational parenting strategies make a huge difference. This includes implementing structure, consistency, and clear expectations at home.
Structure and consistency. Easier said than done sometimes.
Oh, absolutely, but vital. Using clear rewards and consequences helps, all alongside providing ample love, patience, and unwavering support. Establishing predictable daily routines, maybe simplifying schedules to avoid overwhelm, and engaging in healthy activities together as a family are also really beneficial.
And a point for the parents themselves.
Yes. Let's not forget, self-care for parents is critical. It is exhausting raising a child with ADHD. You absolutely cannot pour from an empty cup. Finding support for yourself is just as important.
So true. And what about school? That's where so many ADHD challenges often become really glaringly apparent, right?
Absolutely. School-based programs and supports are crucial for academic success. Interventions can include simple things like breaking down large assignments into smaller, more manageable steps.
But chunking it down.
Exactly. Providing instructions, both verbally and in writing. Helping students organize their materials using tools like color-coded folders, assignment notebooks, checklists.
Practical tools.
Very practical. Peer-mediated approaches can also be highly effective things like peer tutoring or cooperative learning groups. And sometimes something as straightforward as strategic classroom seating.
Like sitting near the teacher.
Yeah, setting away from major distractions like windows or doors and closer to the teacher for easier redirection can make a surprisingly big difference.
So what can teachers do sort of moment to moment in the classroom to help manage behavior supportively and foster a positive learning environment?
Teachers have a lot of really effective tools they can use. They can use nonverbal cues, like a pre-agreed signal, to redirect a student without drawing attention. Offering choices as rewards can be motivating. Using timers for tasks can help with focus and transitions.
Positive reinforcement.
Huge. Providing positive and specific praise for effort and progress, not just outcomes. And delivering clear, calm, verbal redirection when needed, rather than reacting emotionally. And absolutely vital is consistent homeschool communication.
Keeping everyone on the same page.
Exactly. Through things like daily report cards, regular emails, shared online platforms, whatever works. That coordinated support between home and school is invaluable.
Okay. And shifting to adults now.
Yeah.
What kind of structured support systems are available for them beyond the medical interventions we've discussed?
For adults, various forms of therapy can be immensely helpful, assuming they're well-suited or adapted. Talk therapy can help address emotional challenges, self-esteem issues, or past negative experiences. Marriage and family therapy can be crucial for navigating relationship difficulties often impacted by ADHD symptoms.
Right.
And as we discussed, CBT, especially when it's tailored or adapted for ADHD, can provide really practical strategies for challenges like disorganization, procrastination, and time management.
What about things like coaching? Is that different from therapy?
Yes, it's generally more focused on the practical present-day challenges. ADHD coaching, or sometimes called behavioral or success coaching, offers very practical, solution-focused strategies, like helping someone organize their home or work environment, structure their day more effectively, learn to prioritize tasks, break down projects. It's very hands-on. Some people also find professional organizers incredibly helpful for initially decluttering and setting up efficient, sustainable systems at home or work.
That sounds incredibly useful.
Yeah.
But all these strategies and supports, they really hinge on first getting an accurate understanding of what's actually going on, don't they?
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who might suspect ADHD in themselves or a loved one, what's the crucial very first step?
The critical first step, without a doubt, is always a thorough professional evaluation, getting assessed by someone qualified, like a psychiatrist, psychologist, neurologist, or a specially trained pediatrician or primary care doctor.
Why is that so important? Can't you just tell from the symptoms?
It's so important because symptoms that look like ADHD can actually stem from many other conditions. Things like learning disabilities, anxiety disorders, depression, sleep disorders, thyroid problems, even the effects of trauma or major life events.
Ah, okay. So it's about ruling other things out, too.
Exactly. A proper diagnosis rules out these other possibilities and ensures that the treatment plan is targeting the right issue, making it much more likely to be effective. You need the right diagnosis to get the right help.
Makes perfect sense. And finally, just briefly, are there any steps we can potentially take, perhaps even during pregnancy or early childhood, that could maybe help prevent ADHD or reduce the risk?
Well, the exact causes of ADHD are still being researched, and we know it's a complex interplay of genetics and environmental factors. It's not fully preventable,
Right.
but some general prevention strategies related to promoting healthy brain development are advised. These include things like avoiding harmful substances, alcohol, illicit drugs, tobacco smoke during pregnancy,
Okay.
protecting young children from exposure to environmental toxins like lead paint. And while the research is still evolving, some experts suggest considering limiting excessive screen time for very young children, under age 2 especially, as recommended by pediatric guidelines for overall development.
Good general advice for healthy development anyway?
Exactly. Promoting a healthy environment for brain development is always a good idea.
Okay. You've now taken a deep dive into attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We've moved far beyond those common stereotypes to really try and understand its wide-ranging impacts, the complexities of diagnosis and treatment across the lifespan, and the powerful role of holistic, comprehensive support.
Yeah, you've uncovered that ADHD rarely travels alone. Those comorbidities are key, that it changes significantly from childhood to adulthood, and you've seen that crucial, really stark distinction between generic therapies and truly adapted therapies,
Right.
and how profoundly that difference can affect outcomes for people.
So, given this profound and, let's face it, often misunderstood impact of ADHD across the entire lifespan, and the clear benefits we're seeing of truly personalized, informed care, especially highlighted by that CBT study, it leaves us with a question, doesn't it? What further steps can we collectively take as individuals, as families, as educators, as healthcare providers, as a society to ensure that everyone, regardless of their age or their gender, receives the nuanced, the tailored, the adapted support they truly need to not just manage, but to actually thrive